Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where you can get everything you need to make mom feel special. For breakfast in bed or a surprise brunch, they've got fresh fruits and gorgeous flowers to help celebrate mom. Get started in the Safeway app.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
Before you head out, consider bringing your raincoat. We're likely going to have a really wet start to the week. We're talking the chance of soaking rain tonight and tomorrow. That's good weather, though, for watching the Nuggets kick off their second-round playoff series tonight at 7:30. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel.
And I'm Bazi Kanani. Coming up, the Coloradan leading the energy department brings to the administration new language on climate change.
Trump often called climate change a hoax or a scam. Wright's offering something more complicated.
But it may not change policy.
Also, 3 days left for lawmakers to try to pass bills they've wrestled over for months. Then, starting today, the federal government is once again collecting from people who got too far behind on student loans.
About 100,000 loans in Colorado are in delinquency.
Plus, we answer a Colorado Wonders question about why we don't have more fruit trees in public places.
Families can go into the park and pick an apple or a peach.
It's Monday, May 5th. Here's the news in Colorado today. Uber has threatened to leave Colorado if a bill to regulate rideshare passes at the State House. That is one of the major capital dramas left to play out over the next 3 days. CPR's Benta Berglund is here. She's going to tell us what to expect before the annual legislative session ends Wednesday night. Benta, can you tell us a little bit more about this rideshare regulation?
It would make it so drivers for companies like Uber and Lyft would have to record each ride. So that's both audio and video. And it would put some restrictions on drivers so they couldn't offer passengers food or drink. Backers say it's all about safety for riders and drivers. But Uber said it checks a box and fails to deliver and would increase liability for the company. And the rideshare companies also don't like that they would have to reimburse drivers for the cost of audio and video recording. And like you mentioned, Uber threatened to leave Colorado if this becomes law. So the stakes are pretty high. The Democratic sponsor of this bill brought it forward after she said she was sexually assaulted in a Lyft last year. And she said she's heard about thousands of similar cases, and the goal really is to make these rideshare apps safer.
So that's one thing that's happening. What else do you have your eye on this week?
Another bill that's still in process would add protections for transgender Coloradans and for out-of-state parents who bring children here to get gender-affirming medical care. This is a bill that's a top priority for Democrats, but it's actually run into some concerns from LGBTQ groups, some national legal groups, and they were worried certain provisions would be vulnerable to court challenges, just weren't robust enough, and would make the bill a target. The sponsors did make some big changes to the bill. They stripped out the most controversial provision that dealt with child custody issues. And last week on the show, I talked about what's happening with the effort to make it easier for workers to unionize. This is a bill that eliminates a second vote required to be a fully unionized shop. So that means unions can collect dues from all workers. Governor Polis said he'd only sign something if business and labor were on board. The two sides negotiated for months, but ultimately couldn't reach a deal. The House will take up the original bill on Monday. I talked to Dennis Doherty about it. He's the head of the Colorado AFL-CIO.
This is the most important piece of labor law legislation this year in any state, and possibly over the past 5 years.
So it looks like Democratic lawmakers are poised to pass the union's proposal, even though Governor Jared Polis has said he won't sign it. So we could see some drama around that in the final days and post-session.
Benta, thank you, and I hope you have your coffee ready for the next few days.
Yes, thanks, Harlow. I will definitely need that.
He's not a climate denier. He's a climate realist. That is the distinction from Chris Wright, the U.S. Secretary of Energy. Since joining President Trump's cabinet, the Coloradan has continued to say he agrees with the science that climate change is real, but he says it's not the threat to human life that it's made out to be. CPR's Sam Brash has a new story today about how Wright's views are a model for the Trump administration. Sam, Chris Wright first gained national attention as a fracking executive here in Colorado. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about the Chris Wright origin story, you really got to start with an episode back in 2020, and it has to do with corporate jackets.
Jackets?
Yeah. So in 2020, the North Face, the apparel company, they refused to fill an order for a Texas oil and gas company. Now, this is not Chris Wright's oil and gas company. He founded and was the CEO for Liberty Energy, which is based here in Denver, but he still took that personally. So he went out of his way to call out the North Face by launching an ad campaign to point out the many ways it uses fossil fuels in its products. Here he is in a YouTube video that went slightly viral.
So North Face is not only an extraordinary customer of the oil and gas industry, they are also a partner with the oil and gas industry. So thank you, North Face, and you're welcome.
But that was in 2020. Why are you bringing it up now?
Wright is at the center of a big shift within the administration. In his first term, Trump often called climate change a hoax or a scam. Wright's offering something more complicated, what he calls climate realism.
Can you walk us through what exactly a climate realist is?
Okay, so unlike old school climate deniers, Wright at least acknowledges that fossil fuels warm the planet, but he insists that the risks are overblown, especially compared to the benefits that hydrocarbons like oil, gas, and coal offer the modern world. Think about those fleece jackets, or a big one for him is cheap energy, something he says that poorer countries need a lot more of.
The Trump administration will treat climate change for what it is, a global physical phenomenon that is a side effect of building the modern world.
He repeatedly says that fossil fuels are really the only viable option in the short term, and it's just not practical to shift to sources like wind and solar.
Climate realist. I expect the climate scientists might have a problem with him using the word realist. What are they saying?
So this is where you get into whether Wright is really doing, climate realism or climate skepticism. Wright makes this move of saying climate change is real. But when you ask him about the consequences of climate change, things get a lot more complicated. A really good example of this is when he visited the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden just a month or so ago. Here's what he said when someone asked him about climate change and whether it played a role in the Marshall Fire. That's the most destructive fire in Colorado history that happened in Boulder County back in 2021.
Calling the Marshall Fire, these other fires due to climate change is just simply not to look at the data. Like, it's a real physical phenomenon. It's worth understanding a little bit, but to call it a crisis and point to disasters and say that that's climate change, that's to say I'm not going to do my homework.
Climate scientists obviously feel they have done their homework on this. Many studies have shown that just a little bit of warming will increase the amount of acreage that burns around the world significantly. And with respect to the Marshall Fire, they point out that this happened during a record dry, warm period in December. Those conditions were far more likely due to climate change.
How do his beliefs affect what's happening in the real world and how the government responds to climate change?
So since he won confirmation and became the U.S. Secretary of Energy, he's rolled back energy efficiency rules. He's approved new natural gas export terminals, something that was controversial during the Biden administration. He's also promoted alternative sources like nuclear, but fossil fuels are still at the core of the Trump administration's energy dominance agenda. And that's the main way Wright's rhetoric on climate change isn't really that different from past forms of climate denial. At the end of the day, it's still a justification for continued fossil fuel development.
Sam Brash, thank you.
Thank you.
750,000 people in Colorado have outstanding student loans. If you're one of them, and if you've struggled to keep up with payments, you probably know that today is important. If you've defaulted, the federal government is restarting involuntary collections. They've been paused for 5 years because of the pandemic. CPR's Jenny Brundin is here to explain what this means. Jenny, first, why are these collections resuming?
The Trump administration wants to make sure it collects what it's owed. Education Secretary Linda McMahon spoke on Fox News.
We're trying to make it easily accessible for responsible folks to pay back their loans, but they need to get on it because there isn't going to be any loan forgiveness program. As you know, the White House press secretary said this afternoon, there's no such thing as loan forgiveness. It just gets transferred to someone else, and that's just not fair.
How many Coloradans are affected by this deadline today?
About 100,000 loans in Colorado are in delinquency. That means they've missed payments, and a subset of those are in default. They haven't made payment in about 9 months. So this is a big deal. If they don't pay up, they'll start losing tax refunds, have their wages garnished, and could see their future Social Security benefits reduced. It also impacts your credit score, which makes it harder to get loans for things like cars.
Lots of impacts there. So what options do borrowers have at this point?
Their options for payment plans are shrinking. Many Coloradans, more than 100,000, use something called SAVE. That shrunk their monthly payments based on income. But Republicans sued and have blocked that program. So there are other income-based payment plans that are just less generous, and Republicans in Congress want to reduce those options even more. I think the tricky thing is that there was staff at the U.S. Department of Education who would help borrowers. I talked to a Colorado-based student loan attorney named Karen Cody Hopkins. She relied on a Rolodex of veteran staffers to help her solve complex student loan cases.
Everybody that I could have talked to at the department got fired.
Trump also wants to move the $1.6 trillion in outstanding loans that the government oversees from the gutted Department of Education to the Small Business Administration, which itself is undergoing a 43% reduction in staffing. The important thing to remember is if your loan is in delinquency, you may be eligible for deferments or forbearance and public service loan forgiveness. But it's important not to fall all the way into default because then your options shrink even further.
The advice is then to take some sort of action.
Exactly.
Thanks, Jenny.
You're welcome.
When I think of a spring day, I picture tree-lined streets filled with the white and pink blossoms of apple and cherry trees. The aroma is stunning. Thornton resident Brooke Baker asked CPR to look into the issue of why there aren't more fruit trees like these in city parks. She thinks they're pretty and provide much-needed shade in sunny Colorado, and she says there's an extra bonus.
Families can go into the park and pick an apple or a peach. And I just think it's a really nice idea. And I wondered why there weren't more fruiting trees in our parks.
CPR's Andrea Dukakis took up Baker's question and found the answer is a little more complex than just planting more trees. Would you believe there are some health and safety issues involved? Luke Coloradan is the city forester for Denver.
Fruit trees have a very special place. They produce litter, fruit, correct? So when we have to take that into mind, we have to consider the environment, what's around it, right? Are we planting this tree in a right-of-way near a sidewalk or a street, where if we have fruit that's produced, it creates litter and it could be a slip, trip, and fall hazard?
Coloradan says Denver does in fact plant fruit trees in parks.
Most fruit trees we plant, though, are sterile so that they don't produce a physical fruit, right? But they will flower and they will provide those benefits.
Overall, for tree cover,
we've got about a 16% canopy cover, and there's a lot of opportunity for growth there, but it's hard. And, we're trying to install new trees. Recently, Mayor Mike Johnston created a goal for us to plant and install 4,500 trees this year. And that is a record number of tree plantings for us that we're shooting for.
They currently do a little more than half that a year. And of course, Denver isn't the best place for fruit trees in particular. Hot, dry weather can be a difficult environment to grow fruit since fruit trees need more moisture. And if you're lucky enough to have a fruit tree near you, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to pick the fruit.
I tell you, it is a challenge to go out there and even pull an apple off to enjoy because those birds, those squirrels, those raccoons, they get to it all before us.
This question came to us through Colorado Wonders. Submit your question about our state at the link in the show notes.
Thank you for listening to Colorado Today. Be sure to tap follow on your podcast app and leave a review. Colorado Today is powered by the journalism of CPR News, Denverite, and KRCC. You can support local independent news by making a donation. The link is in our show notes. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel.
And I'm Bazi Kanani. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway. Going on a trip soon? Safeway pharmacists can help no matter where you're headed with travel vaccines, medications, and over-the-counter items. Schedule your consultation at safeway.com/pharmacy.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.